So there's a couple of synths that I want to show you that are similar to what I would like to design with you. And one of them is this one from Defeated No More. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Filter kind of opens up on a complex sound. Really a cool sound. Also in this one as well, in the pre. Here. With restless. Such a cool sound. So there's lots of sounds like this too. Like they use this big sound, this big synth sound a lot. Like here. So really cool stuff, and it's a really nice thing to start with before we get into the bass. So let's go ahead and make a sound similar to that. So to make a sound like this, let's open up Anna here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to initialize this entire patch so that we can start fresh. And I'm going to make sure, I'm going to come down to the bottom left here and make sure it's on, not on monophonic mode, but on polyphonic, which means, you know, monophonic is deselected so we can play chords, yeah? And I'm also going to increase the number of polyphonic voices to about 16 because we're going to be playing some complex chords. So we want as many voices as we can get. Now, the thing with those disclosure sounds is that, you know, I was reading in some interviews that they use this synth in Logic called, I think it's the ESX or EXS24 in Logic, and it is a very, very simple synth where you just kind of layer together a few different waveforms. Like you can use like a sine, like a square, a sawtooth, all the basics. And so that's the good news, is that we can get some extraordinary results with just simple waveforms. So that's what we're going to do to start with. So the first thing to think about when you're designing a patch are the waveforms. And for this first one, I'm going to stick with a sawtooth. So I like this. There's a sawtooth called, let me see if I can find it, Sawtooth Jupiter. I like the way that this one sounds, and I'm actually going to lower the volume here a little bit. Yeah. So let's increase the volume a little bit to make sure that this is kind of the main part of the sound. And then I'm going to head over to Oscillator 2 at the top here, and we're going to, let's pick like I'm going to choose like a square wave. And since we did the Jupiter saw, let's do the square wave from Jupiter as well. Or maybe Juno rather. Okay, so what we need to do in order to hear this is we need to increase the number of voices from 0 to 1, and we're going to increase the volume up as well. Yeah. And then for the third oscillator, I'm going to choose something slightly different again. We're going to choose this alpha Juno sub. And once again, we need to increase the voices to 1. And this one, I'm going to increase the octave. So you can kind of hear it going there. So we've got a sort of a complex mix of a few different simple waveforms, which is a good place for us to start. Now, on the top right hand of the synth, you can see this multi-sampler section, and I like to use this to sometimes add in some noise so that it thickens up the sound a little bit, and it kind of does a nice job of averaging the highs out of the noise profile of the synth that we're making, which will be a little bit more clear once you hear what we do with this noise synth. So I'm going to choose Juno Noise. And you hear how you can like hear the noise basically underneath everything. It's another situation where I like to just back it off as much as possible, so you almost don't even notice it. And I'm also going to increase the high pass amount, so it's just playing like none of the rumbly part of the noise. just a nice way to thicken stuff up and make it sound a little bit more interesting. Now, also with this higher oscillator, the other thing that I wanted to do is increase the number of voices to 3 or 4. It just adds so much life to what we're working with now. Yeah, something like this. And I think this is sounding pretty good to start with. So now what I'm going to do is that, like, once you pick the waveforms and the noise profile, I like to move on to the amplitude envelope section, because that's going to have a big effect on how it works rhythmically within the song. And we want this to be kind of a slow, like washy sound, right? So we need to make it a little bit slower to reflect that. So we're going to increase the decay time to almost a second, and then let's also increase the release time so that when we let off the keys, it will actually, it'll hang on to it for a second. Yeah, something like this. Perfect. And then the other thing I'm going to set up too is I'm going to change the filter type to be this like Moog style low pass filter. Because I really like how this sounds when you increase the resonance a little bit and you lower the cutoff. Because that is going to be a big part of how we achieve the sound that we're after here. Another thing that they like to do too is add in some vibrato. So let's do that as well. Let's use this LFO that we've got set up over here, and we're going to change the target to pitch fine all. Something, relatively subtle here. And let's also change the rate to, like an 8th note. Yeah, something like this. It's also nice to have a little bit of a delay on there as well, so that it doesn't cloud the chord voicing that you're playing. Maybe we can even back it off a little bit here. So now we've got a really nice starting point. And one thing with washy, like pad sounds or even like other synth sounds, one thing to look out for is the lower mids, like somewhere around 200 hertz. And actually inside of this synth, if you go to the EQ section and you switch it on, you can even switch it on with this button as well. But if you click on where it says EQ, you can see that the low mids are set up to be around 200 hertz. This stuff right here. So it's nice to just like ease off on those and clean it up in the mix a little bit. Just as a starting point, nothing too permanent or anything, but just a nice thing to start with. The other thing I want to do is add in a little bit of chorus to thicken up the sound a little bit. So you can see I activated it here with this little bar down here. And we're just going to increase the dry wet. And then even just like how the settings are initially, I actually even just like this. Like it sounds cool. But we're not going to stop there. We're going to, this is kind of the meat and potatoes of the sound. And what we're going to do in the next section is focus on the automation of the cutoff filter. But for now, let's spice up the sound a little bit more. And actually, you can, there's this plugin, it's called the Juno 60 from Sonic Academy. And it's a really cool thing to add as well. So it is chorus on top of chorus, but it adds like a different flavor, which I really like. So this is what it sounds like. And there's a couple of different modes which you can experiment with. But I really like this second mode here. If we just back off the wet dry balance a little bit. It's starting to sound a little bit larger than life, which is exactly what I want to go for here. Now, one other thing I learned from Disclosure's interviews is that they use ring modulation a lot. Or it's actually a combination, I think, between frequency shifting and ring modulation. And so let's add that to this synth to show you what it can do in the stereo image and also in terms of the harmonics. So I'm going to open up Shifter inside of Ableton, which is a really interesting little device. And let's set the mode to be pitch shifting. You can hear what this starts to do when you change the chorus frequency. Like it, well, it changes the pitch, right? But you can use this to your advantage too. If you just use the fine knob, back it off a little bit. And then what you do is you bring the dry wet balance down. And it adds this really cool beating sound. You can slow it down a little bit if you want. And another thing I really like to add in is this envelope follower. So envelope follower button, because when you activate this and you press something with a higher velocity and you increase the amount, it will reflect that based on where it changes the frequency shift to be. So if I just actually go lower than 0 and it starts to kind of start lower and go up. Like you can hear you get amazing sounds right away. But this is kind of the one I want to start with. So it adds just like a really nice kind of, it's almost like, you know, you're just like shifting the floor a little bit, right? It adds a really cool element to it. And then maybe we can even add in an EQ just to tighten some stuff up a little bit. If we high pass it, and then maybe we could even add in some like, yeah, just make it like, people call this like a smiley face EQ, where you're kind of increasing the lows and the highs, but really the same thing is achieved if you lower the mids and then you raise the gain. So something like this would be a good starting point. But the idea here is that what we're going to do is when the time comes and we've created our chord progression, we're going to use the some automation on top of the cutoff filter inside of the synth to come up with a cool rhythm that we can add on top of our drum groove, right? Like, but I recommend just kind of playing around with between the fine knob and the dry wet amount. You can have it go even slower, and actually let me increase the cutoff a little bit. Just add another crazy little like layer on top of everything else. But yeah, we're gonna work on automating the cutoff filter in a later section, so that we can come up with a really cool little synth that we can add on top of our drums here.